Hello, and welcome to this literally better late than never edition of the Purple Journal podcast. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of purplePTSD.com and VikingsTerritory.com, and Tech Wizard, by the way. Here with my friends, if I hope, still, in Mr. Joe Oberly and Luke Braun. How you doing, fellas?
Good. But I have a headache now.
I feel this. I have deja vu. This is the deja vu edition of the Purple Journal.
It's like we've had this exact conversation before.
I've had nightmares that start this way. We're joking around because
I'm really good, Joe. Glad to be back on the air.
I've had a nightmare that was that.
The wacky morning show.
Jesus.
Yeah, we're joking around because we got about 10 minutes into the podcast and I realized that he was not recording. So.
And it was gold. My God. Only because I talk most of the time.
Well, let's be honest.
Yeah. I'm actually relieved that we have a second chance at this.
Wow.
Especially because I think the people in Minnesota are so sick of hearing and thinking about the snow that the fact that we started the show by bemoaning all of the weather here might have just reminded people of the fact that we live in the definition of purgatory up here in Minnesota. Mr. Joe Oberly is the editor for a golf magazine, and that was part of what he said as there should be golf weather or the golf season.
Not happy. I'm more bitter than Twins fans are gonna have to go sit in the snow on Sunday. So, but it happens. It's Minnesota. You get to April and then the natives start getting restless. So that's what we got.
Totally. And Joe also writes for purplePTSD.com, VikingsTerritory.com. And the Sports Post. Luke Braun is here, but he is not actually here in Minnesota. He is in the foggy Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's pretty nice out right now.
But it probably still smells like it was burning a few months ago. So
that's true.
That's just the cigarettes.
Luke writes for Purple PTSD, Vikings Territory, and he's the co-host of the Pocket Protectors podcast over on the Climbing the Pocket network, if you guys want to go to the climbingthepocket.com. We've been away for a while. We've sort of had an edict for the off season that we didn't want to kind of, with the growing audience that we have, a lot of you guys are automatically getting this download into your phone or whatever device that you use to listen to the show, and so we wanted to make sure that we were coming in with some pertinent information. And with that in mind, let's talk about players that got released 2 weeks ago. I'm kidding.
Let's talk about Tom Compton.
The deep dive. But yeah, there's been some stuff going on. I mean, I first wanted to go back to the first topic that we brought up on the show that we tried to record a few minutes ago, which was the wide receiver position, the swaps for the Wrights at that position. Joe wrote an article, I think earlier this week, a couple days ago, about that. And so I wanted to kind of just get your opinion, Joe, on kind of break that down for us in terms of the money behind it, and then we can get into like the fit and why we think that happened.
Well, there's an old saying from my vintage is I don't chew my cabbage twice, but I guess I'm going to have to.
What kind of?
It's a professional operation.
Exactly.
With the Depression era.
Joe, you'll be hearing me complain the whole show. Anyway, I was, initially, I mean, I like Jarius Wright, certainly from a standpoint of, talking to him. He's a good guy that always stand up with the media. But, I never understood the decrease in his targets and his opportunities. Yeah. And then, 2 years ago, it was really down. It was way low. And then it was an uptick this year. And he made the most of them with a lot of third down catches and a lot of catches for first downs and did well. But still not a lot of great opportunities. And he had 2 years left on a pretty lucrative contract for a slot receiver, and certainly one for the amount of time production he was able to give. But anyway, so I didn't want to see him. I was surprised, I guess, a little bit. Maybe they, let him go so he could get on with somebody else. And I thought, well, we kind of got the same guy back. in Kendall Wright, but then if you start looking at production and throughout their career, Kendall Wright has had a much better career, certainly early on. And he came in, now we hear, for a lot less money than certainly Jarius was going to get this year. I think it's like $3 million to $1 million, and there's some incentives there for Kendall Wright. And so I was surprised he had offers from other teams, but he was still interested in taking this job, and I think partially, at least that's what people were saying. He had, throughout his career, he's had so many different quarterbacks thrown to him. He wanted to go to where there was a stable situation at quarterback, which is kind of funny to say that he chose the Vikings with that criteria. But they looking forward, they seem to do so, and I think he may be great for Kirk Cousins to throw it to, and I think he's a little bigger than Jarius, right, and a little bit better at yards after the catch. Certainly his numbers show that. So I facetiously said, do two rights make a wrong? And, with the story, and I started out not, maybe going to say that. And then by the time I got to the end, after looking at everything, I felt, the Vikings made a good move, and I think they've upgraded. We'll see how it comes out.
And really quickly, I'm not like the biggest expert on the cap, or how that works, but with the dead money that the Vikings had with Wright, isn't that essentially the same difference though this season?
No.
Or how does that work?
Oh,
against the cap, since there's like $2 million against the cap, and then you get the $1 million with him, it'd be $3 million one way or another. Isn't that how it works?
I don't have the dead cap in front of me. If it is $2 million, then that's the way it would work.
Yeah, and Joe's, at least Joe's article said it was $2 million. So.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that is the way it would work. But all of Jarius Wright's 2019 is also off the books with no dead cap, so that does help. I think most of the position aggregators or wide receiver evaluators like Pro Football Focus or Bleacher Report and stuff have Kendall Wright as a better player than Jarius Wright, if only by a little bit. They are pretty similar guys, but Kendall Wright's also a very consistent producer after the catch. He's got 5 or 6 yards after the catch in each of the last 3 years on average per reception, which is really good.
And he had a rookie quarterback throwing to him last year, and he had a nice season down in Chicago.
Right, and that does matter. Quarterback accuracy totally matters for yards after the catch. So I think there's a lot of ability there, but ultimately the receivers after Diggs, Thielen, and Rudolph, I think after those three and then taking away the running backs, I think that's 80% of all of the targets of 2017 can be attributed to those people. So there's only 20% of the targets to be divvied up between Kendall Wright and Treadwell, and if you have a draft pick or whoever. So ultimately this is all kind of going to have a low impact one way or another. So it does make sense to try to be cheaper there. And then at the end of 2019, you can kind of do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, and I wonder, I don't know if you guys know offhand, but the big season that he had, I think it was his second season in 2013 in Tennessee, where he eclipsed 1,000 yards. Mm-hmm. Was he playing in the slot that year, or was he more of a
no idea?
Because that's kind of where my
I don't think
reasoning
he was
is in how he did so well.
That's a good question, Joe. I don't think he was, but I don't know for sure either. And it certainly, when you look at those numbers, it certainly doesn't look like slot.
Yeah, and I guess this ties into a couple different things. I wrote an article, I think last week, about kind of my fear of the wide receiver three position, just based on the fact that Diggs typically misses 2 to 3 games a season, and that would have meant that we would have had a couple games with our top 3 receivers being Thielen, Treadwell, and Coley, just based on the roster. So I think that's a good move there. There is some talk about, I kind of tied that into the fact that there's some articles out of Washington that are older that talk about Kirk Cousins and his ability to spread the ball around. It looked like he spread the ball around a lot in Washington. And I know, Luke, you kind of touched on this.
He's a really quick field reader, so that makes sense.
And yeah,
he could go through a progression really fast.
Okay, so I was just wondering if that was more of a scheme thing, or if that was something that, like you just said, Cousins just kind of does on his own.
Yeah, both. Well, I mean, yards after the catch is probably more of a scheme thing than it is a Kirk Cousins thing, just because it's those Kendall Wright plays were all, either bootlegs or crossers designed for yards after the catch, or even short swing passes and stuff. But in terms of what you just mentioned, going through a progression and spreading the ball around and having like diversity of targets, that's probably a scheme thing, but it's only a scheme thing you can do if you trust your quarterback to go through the progressions quickly, which Kirk Cousins is pretty well documented to be very quick at.
Yeah. I felt like a lot of people still that I talked to say, well, I thought Keenum earned the job or that he was good enough. But I felt like there were a lot of opportunities last season where it didn't seem like Keenum was either going through his progressions like quick enough or he might have panicked. And it just seemed like there was a lot of opportunities, especially with Thielen open down the field, that Keenum missed, that I feel like perhaps Cousins will be able to take advantage of. But
yeah, there was a thing with Keenum where like he would take the first read if it was there, and he was coached to do this, so it's not necessarily his fault. But like regardless of the depth of it, and we've been kind of grew used to Norv Turner, who ran an offense that you read like deep to short. So you read the deepest route. If the deepest route's not there, then you read the intermediate route. And if that's not there, then you check down or whatever. And with Shurmur, it was a little different. It was like, no, it's just whatever the first route is, whatever the designed route is. And if it's there, it's there. And with Diggs and Thielen, it was always there, so he always went to them. But that means when somebody like Treadwell would get open, or there was a really high-profile one with Kyle Carter, who like was wide open, like in the end zone, jumping up and down in case Keenum totally missed it, because that guy was the second read and the first read was there, so he took it. So that was an interesting dynamic where he was like doing what he was coached to do, but not really breaking the play or improvising enough or looking like downfield to other things to see if they were there before he threw the short route that this play was designed for.
And it's interesting that you said it's not his fault, because if he's being told to do that, obviously it isn't. But at the same time, not to get into like a philosophical argument about it, but that their coaches were doing that also for a reason. Like, I'm not sure that the coaches are going to do that they might have a little more confidence in Cousins to allow him to make those decisions.
They always had low confidence in Keenum too, which maybe is either telling or really, really weird, depending on. We'll probably have a better opinion on that after he has a year in Denver.
Definitely. And really quickly in the wide receiver 3 position too, since the last show, I thought it was interesting that Zimmer kind of touched on Treadwell and stated that he had to get out of his own way, which is interesting. Because I know, Joe, we talked about this on the podcast at the time. You were I don't want to say a big defender of Treadwell, but I was a really anti-Treadwell guy at the time of the draft. Even going into the OTAs, I was kind of picking on the fact that he was struggling with route running and a lot of like drop balls and fumbles and whatnot. And you had mentioned that Treadwell was always, the type of guy that would stay and catch a million passes from the jugs machine, and he was working really hard. Do you feel like it's a mental thing with him? I know, obviously, like Luke said, the opportunities are few and far between, and that could change this season. But I mean, as somebody who's kind of been around the team a lot more than I have or Luke has, I wanted your opinion just on that comment from Zimmer.
Well, I wasn't necessarily a Treadwell guy. I was whatever Joe says, I'm against it. So.
That's not a bad line of reasoning, unless your house is on fire.
I'm the anti-Joe. No, anyway, and that was a really telling comment to come from Zimmer. I mean, when you got a rookie in there and he's doing that thing, doing all the extra work and working his tail off, and you're complimentary of it. I'm sure coaches want that to be instilled, that that's part of the deal about being a pro, and I think he came out and said that running the stairs after the night before you got something going on, I can't remember the exact quote, is not necessarily the smartest way to use your time and to prepare for a game. And when your head coach says that's telling there's something going on there. I just don't think he is the toughest guy to play inside. He has trouble, getting free from who's ever on him defensively, and doesn't have. I don't think he does. It's not that he doesn't have the strength. I don't know if he has the skills or the know-how
his release technique was a big thing coming out of the draft, and it has not improved really. I mean, it got a little better last year, but it's still kind of one of his biggest problems is release off the line.
And
I think they know that. I think they know that, and they're just trying to figure out ways maybe to get through to him. And when your coach calls you out in front of somebody and saying that, you're working hard, but you're not working the right way, you better sit up and pay attention because, we didn't go through that with, what's his name? Cordero Patterson.
Yeah, I was going to say running those. Zimmer sets up a coaching opportunity, mentoring opportunity with Michael Irvin, and Patterson decided to run on Sandy Hills instead. I do think I've used mockdraftables.com in my argument against Treadwell probably 3-4 times since that draft, and my biggest thing with him was the fact that he was known as a guy who could overpower the DB and go up for, win a lot of contested catches and basically just go after jump balls. And it looked like just from his combine stats, like the things you think he would be good at to do that, like his vertical or his upper body strength, he was in like the low, like under 20th percentile for wide receivers in that draft for like bench press reps, and his vertical jump was pretty horrible. So that was always my concern, was that once he gets to the pros and everyone's stronger and faster, he might not be able to do that. I don't know if that's necessarily been the case. Luke just said his release technique is bad too. But I also think that it's for Treadwell, you have to look at it through the lens of they drafted him to play with Teddy, and I feel like the Teddy offense is completely different for a million different reasons. I mean, obviously Norv Turner was there. It felt like when Teddy, I went to about, I think, 5 or 6 games the last season at TCF Bank Stadium, and it was literally almost every pass play was just like a 15-yard button hook, and I think they wanted Treadwell just to do that. And he should have been good at that because that's what he was good at in college. But when Teddy went down, and especially when Shermer came in and kind of evolved the offense into something more fluid than that, I think that Treadwell doesn't have the skill set to do that, and that's not what he was drafted for. So I think that's kind of a important aside to the Treadwell thing.
Big year for him.
Yeah. Just on his combine, he was hurt, and I think the team kind of dismissed his combine because he was still coming back from that leg injury, so they didn't think he was going to so it's like, well, he's probably actually more athletic than this. And that might have been a mistake ultimately, but I think that's where their heads were at. But I think the contested catch thing they looked at as a positive, he's good at this, versus it's a negative, he's never open.
Yeah. Good point.
His contract status is he's got two years left and almost $6 million in dead cap money this year. Next year it reduces.
Yeah, you can't cut him.
Next year it reduces to $3 million. So and it's still a rookie contract, but there's a lot there. So next year he better prove something this year, or else they're certainly going to look elsewhere. We'll see if they take a wide receiver in their draft. That's a huge sign.
And I
don't think it is. I mean, it's pretty clear that he's going to play out his rookie contract and leave. It would take a pretty incredible sequence of events. At this point, we said this last year too when they drafted Rodney Adams and Stacy Coley. Are they done with Treadwell? Treadwell got more target. I think he had the 4th most targets on the team. I think it's.
He did?
He had 35. Oh. Yeah, he had more than Jarius Wright.
That's almost double. It's actually almost exact. I think Jarius Wright had 18. So.
What did the running backs have?
McKinnon had more.
Yeah.
But that's it. But he's those were all screens and design things. But I think we shouldn't look at what else the Vikings do on the roster to try to gauge how they feel about it's very clear that he's not very good and needs to be better, or he's not going to be used a lot. I don't think we need to read into any other tea leaves. They'll probably get another receiver just because right now they have the two main guys.
Luke.
They have the 2 main guys, Treadwell and Kennedy. You do need another person, so I would anticipate that they draft a wide receiver, but that's not because I wouldn't anticipate that they would draft a Treadwell replacement. It's no, you just actually need another one because right now Stacy Coley is guaranteed a roster spot.
And they did get extremely lucky, I believe. I mean, if people look back, and I've heard multiple people I talked to say, why did they even use a first-round pick on Treadwell? We didn't need a receiver, and they're kind of forgetting.
No idea Thielen was good.
There you go. They know, and Diggs obviously it looked good, but Thielen kind of didn't necessarily come from he improved so much that season that it was something that, had that not happened, the Vikings might have been screwed at the position and might have been forced to go to the first round like they've done I mean, I've talked about this, and people hate this take, but I love it. I talk about the receivers that the team has taken either since Moss left or since Spielman became part of the organization, either as like that triangle of authority or the main guy. And outside of Diggs and Thielen, who wasn't drafted, they're terrible at drafting receivers. So I really
outside of the two best acquisitions they've made in the draft process, they're really bad at it.
I'm talking about receivers in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, no, there's a whole bunch of whiffs. I'm just ribbing you.
Yeah, I mean, Diggs was amazing. I'm a huge Diggs fan. He's a Big Ten guy, so obviously I'm going to promote that. But he was a 5th rounder, and then you get a guy that's undrafted.
Three deep, brother. 3 deep. Oh, that's a while back.
They're coming back. But I wanted to touch on another Zimmer comment that was last week, but I do feel like just based on the type of show that we have and really the just across the board, kind of the emotional support or love that we have for Teddy here, some more than others. You know, I've never been a big Teddy guy, but I want him to succeed, and I do feel bad for him. And Joe, you sent me an email, was it last week, basically when the particulars of Teddy's contract in New York became apparent. It was kind of like you really hammered home to me kind of how dire his situation is and kind of how the league looks at him and in regards to his career and him basically being close to maybe being done. And then a couple days later, they came out that Zimmer said that, you know, he thought Teddy looked great on the field, but the doctors said that something was still not right or not completely healed or something like that in regards to his knee. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that and see what your guys' feelings were. Like, I haven't talked to you about that really, Luke, and I know obviously I still owe you that Teddy Jets jersey.
But it was
holding you to that.
I tend to really clue into what Zimmer says a lot of times and try to figure it out, try to read those tea leaves, because he's a pretty honest guy and pretty frontal. You know, he's always going to try to say something that at least it's not a lie. He might not tell you everything you need to know or want to know when you ask a question, but you know, you can pretty much read what he's saying. And you know, immediately the first thing that came out of his mouth, and he reiterated it here at the combine or the coaches meetings or whatever it was, saying that he thought he and Teddy were going to, you know, rise and fall and together. The next 10 years of their career would be together. And that to me right there, he was looking at this guy's leg that had fallen off and saying, it's over, you know. And then he's the first one to come out and say that how many of these people have had this injury, you know, just a small percentage have ever come back, and certainly none have really played it for very much longer after that. It's a really hard thing to come back with. So that's why I was so surprised at the end of this season when people on you know, bigger radio stations than our podcast are saying, "Oh, Teddy's the guy," and I'm going, how can you say that? You know, I mean, this guy, if you really look at what happened and you see that they moved Bradford right past him in the most crucial point of the year, you know, in the playoffs, and these were all just huge red flags to me, and said, you know, this is a concern. He's, you know, so and then when I now feel like, you know, it's very possible he could be done. He's not going to be the same guy. He's not going to be. His mentality is going to have to change when something that horrific happens to you. Physically, you know, I don't know. I mean, if he may not even get on the field for a long time this year, you know. So in the contract, like you said, Joe, is just evidence of that. It's kind of sad. I don't want to be writing this and saying that it's true just so I'm right, but I just felt all along that we have to see this guy in the field before we can ever make a decision on him. And the Vikings saw him on the field. They knew more than anybody, and they let him walk.
Mm.
Yeah, it was pretty clear that, like, when he was activated in the middle of the season and then he was, you know, put on the roster and he's dressing for games, and it created a lot of optimism, you know, all the way up to the moment in the Bengals game where he actually came in, and it was this huge moment. And it was kind of, now in hindsight with those comments and, you know, what you just mentioned, Joe, like, it's clear that, like, the medicals were never really there to warrant that much optimism, as nice as it was as a fan to, like, experience it.
Right.
And you know, the way that Zimmer always talked about Teddy, that's why I always said, you know, oh, Zimmer's not going to give up on Teddy. Zimmer's not going to give up on Teddy because, you know, when a head coach drafts a quarterback in his first year and they are pretty much married, I think, like, the way that the team has behaved with Teddy, the way that it all transpired, it kind of separates Zimmer from a guy like Leslie Frazier, who, like, would not give up on Ponder, even when there was a mountain of evidence staring him in the face that Ponder is like a bad quarterback and you need to do something else. Yeah. He wouldn't give up on it.
Childress and T-Jack, too.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, and even Childress, like, was willing to go pursue Favre, even though he thought he had his guy. But so the fact that Zimmer was willing to move on, I think, speaks to his ability as a head coach to adapt and not be stubborn and kind of not fall into the same pitfalls that, like, so many, like, one contract and done kind of coaches go through.
Yeah.
So it's heartbreaking because they, you know, you really thought, like, in 2014 when we drafted them, like, you kind of thought, all right, Zimmer and Teddy, here's our future, let's go, and that comes to an end. At least we didn't have to lose both of them.
I was surprised how emotional I felt when Joe sent me that email. I didn't expect to feel that way because it sucks for the guy. He's such an, you know, obviously I've never met him, but he just seems like such a nice guy. But one thing about Zimmer that I wanted to touch on, because from what you said, Luke, too, is, you know, he makes a lot of mistakes. You know, he speaks really honestly, like Joe said, but he does seem willing to realistically look at his faults and try to improve on them. And I think that that's something, like you said, a lot of coaches are really concrete thinkers, I believe, and like Norv Turner basically saying, well, if my system doesn't work, I'm going to quit. That sort of mentality, and at least it seems like Zimmer is open to improving. With an aside that his comment this week that any idiot with a iPad could basically do his job. And I have an iPad, so get ready, everybody. We're going to have 5 wideouts every play.
Zimmer will get the technology right on our podcast, and then you can switch places.
Anyway, so yeah, we did want to touch too on a lot of the moves that have been happening in the NFC. There's been like just an amazing amount of free agency news and trades, especially when free agency began. But even this week, you know, Brandon Cooks today or yesterday got traded to the Rams. The Rams really seem to be loading up, similar to the Vikings, and trying to make a move. I don't know if they're trying to really build that fan base down in LA, but I thought we could start out by talking about the Rams with the caveat that, Luke, obviously you live in Los Angeles, so I'd be interested to see if you notice more people are excited about the team, or
it's Dodgers land right now.
Is it?
I mean, yeah, it's the opening baseball season. I'm sure there'll be a whole bunch of excitement. I mean, I went to the Rams playoff game. There's a lot of excitement there. It's, you know, this is a Rams town now, and the Chargers can just kind of sit quietly in a corner and cry. I do think with what the Rams are doing, it's really interesting because they're putting together a roster that's like super unsustainable long term, right? Like they're going to have to let a lot of these guys go, and they're all on the last year of their deals and looking for big contracts and stuff. But they'll be able to choose which ones they extend and which ones they don't. And I think like the difference between the 2017 Rams and like the 2020 Rams, like I think the 2020 Rams still look better in their future because now they have like negotiating windows with all of these guys, and you get like a really, really good chance to go make a run at a Super Bowl in 2018. So I love what they're doing.
Do you love it?
Hoard a bunch of superstars.
You love it objectively as a football fan, because I know you. Like I've said, yeah. I'm not.
I get to go to the Rams-Vikings game this year. So
there you go. You know, my initial reaction is to be afraid. Which that happens even when my phone rings, so that's not different. But yeah, it just seems
like you right now.
They're a scary team, you know. They brought in Sue, they got rid of Watkins, they brought in. I mean, how good do you think?
They're improving a very good defense. They're showing up on offense. They're bringing in a lot of big contracts, and they're also bringing in some egos that all have to mesh, and that's the thing I'm hoping that doesn't happen in its first year. I mean, it's a young coach they got there, and you know, if Kroenke would have done this in St. Louis, he probably never would have left, you know, to make some of the signings they're doing. And I'm looking at some of their signings. They've got John Sullivan at center. Do you think he would like to knock the Vikings out this year? But It's concerning. I mean, I don't know that a team that makes that many big moves, because you only can put so many on the field. You've got to get these guys to mesh, and the Ndamukong Suh is not he's not the kind of guy that you'd expect to see on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He's got to mix in there. You got mix in with Aaron Donald, and so they're going to be formidable. There's no question about it. But you still got to make it work.
I think Wade Phillips and Sean McVay, if any coaches can really harness that locker room and make all those egos, those guys are definitely tapped into the younger players and what they want. Wade Phillips is basically a 14-year-old boy.
It feels a little NBA-ish. There's certain teams that are turning into super teams. Yeah, and I feel my initial reaction to the Rams in the playoffs where they might fall apart just because they looked like a young team. They played almost scared in that game. And I thought maybe that would carry over to this season, the same way that I felt that, just based on the history, that maybe the Vikings would implode, because they always implode the year after they blow an NFC Championship game. But the difference is that these teams, the Vikings included, are saying, okay, well, let's not let that happen, and let's reboot even the fans' expectation. I mean, this show is a perfect representation of that. I mean, if you look at some of the titles of the show, it was What the F Happened edition of the NFC Championship, and then a week later you got me screaming at Luke about how much I love Kirk Cousins. They rebooted, they kind of changed the narrative a little bit, I think.
Yeah, the team's going to have a completely different complexion with Cousins and DiFilippo. I mean, the defense will remain the same, and it's great that the defense we're running that defense back again, and we're going to have a top 5 defense again, assuming there's not an injury holocaust.
I heard Kevin Seifert from ESPN talking on 1500 ESPN the other day. Actually, it was yesterday, and or no, it was this morning. Yeah, it was this morning. It doesn't matter. And he said that the Vikings don't really have to, speaking about this specifically, he says that they don't necessarily are pushing the Vikings out of the way, that they're the best team and the best defense and all this, and that the Vikings should be afraid that their roster can't compete or play or even beat this team. And, I feel like he's pretty tapped in around the league and has been. And it was, he used to be, he worked for the Tribune here for a long time. So, it's a guy I trust, but I thought that was kind of telling, and I think that's the mentality of the Vikings are going to have, because it's not just going to be the Philadelphia Eagles they have to worry about. You got this team that's was right there last year, and they have improved, and then you got other teams that are trying to get on the board, like the 49ers have also done some things to.
Saints are good. The Packers will be back. Good. It's going to be a fun NFC.
The Panthers, there's a lot of great teams. It should be fascinating, and the Vikings have to not feel like, oh my goodness, everybody's getting better around them, because they've improved quite well too. They've got a solid quarterback. Solid. Joe's probably mad I said he called him solid, but
saving that soundbite.
Exactly. And they, look what they did on the defensive line, which is one of their big holes. Now if they go out and really go after some offensive line to shore it up, either, I don't know if there's anybody left in free agency for him, but certainly to bolster the depth in the draft and get somebody like Elflein that they can come in and start and be as good as he was this year. That Dalvin Cook coming back and Kendall Wright, then they're ready to go. So you can't lose any confidence just at what you're seeing somebody else do.
And it feels like this season is going to be different because the Vikings are playing a lot of those teams. So during the regular season, we're going to know where we're at. I mean, the Vikings last season played every team in the playoffs except for the Eagles during the regular season, if I'm not mistaken. And it feels that way. I think the rumor was that the Vikings and Eagles were going to be the season opener. I don't know if that's been confirmed or not.
It's a rumor. It's also just really common sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's like a leak or this probably will happen because look at it.
That's what happens. And I think both Joe and I touched on the budding rivalry between the Vikings and Eagles. And obviously the Eagles, they lost a lot of players in free agency, which is what happens after you win the Super Bowl. But they've seemingly have improved, obviously, with Wentz coming back. They brought in Bennett, who might go to jail for shoving an elderly person. Nada from the Lions. They brought in one of my favorites, Mike Wallace, at the wide receiver position. I guess I just wanted your opinions on some of those moves as well, Luke, if you want to kind of talk about.
Yeah, they didn't have a lot of work to do because they already were a pretty complete roster and a pretty sustainable one. I think Haloti Ngata, I didn't even realize he went to the Eagles. He's kind of at the tail end of his career, but
that's a nice get for him though.
Yeah. Who else is there?
Mike Wallace.
Kendall Wright's better than Mike Wallace.
Yeah.
I think Jarius Wright's better than Mike Wallace. Mike Wallace stinks. He only has one move.
He had 1,000 yards with what's his face in Baltimore, Flacco.
Yeah, because that's also Joe Flacco's only move.
Yeah, it works.
So yeah, like whatever. They'll still be good. Wentz is good. Their offense is perfectly designed. Their defense is awesome. It kind of feels like they stayed about the same.
Yep, but they probably got deeper.
And this is assuming that Michael Bennett isn't there, because it really doesn't seem like Michael Bennett's going to be there. He's already kind of ostracized in the league's eye. He's just a superstar, but he's one of the outspoken Bennett brothers. So now that there's a scandal, that you've seen other players, like Eric Reed and Kenny Vaccaro, that our teams just kind of jump at the chance to exile them, and I just seems like Bennett's not going to get that much of a leash.
Yeah, I don't think these. I don't want to. Maybe they don't care and they don't think it's fair, but I don't think people realize how conservative a lot of the NFL owners are. And how a lot of this stuff doesn't. Not to get into it, right or wrong, it doesn't jive with. They don't want to be. They want the status quo to remain what it was, which is the NFL grows in popularity every season, and it's a wholesome, family-friendly thing. And we're not going to get into the kneeling thing or whether that's right or wrong or if that was taken out of context. But clearly that didn't work well for the image of the NFL, and I think they want to kind of move away from that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like the guy who a lot of people have been like, oh yeah, you called Kirk Cousins and you should be super happy. I look at the rest of the league and I see a lot of projections from people that I respect online doing just record projections, and they're saying the Vikings will be a better team, but they'll have a worse record, maybe 10-6, 11-5.
Which is okay.
Yeah.
It's a tougher schedule. They should. Makes sense.
I think it's second hardest in the league, but it changes year to year. That's really hard to say.
And honestly, record projections at this time of year are completely useless.
Yeah.
I mean, if we think about it like this time last year, we were like, ooh, the Rams will be lucky to go 7-9, and we'll see if the Saints can break 500. And by the way, the Falcons are going to be 15-1. But we thought the Bucks were the bell of the ball.
Heir apparent.
We don't know what's going on.
Is this a bad time to promote my record projection article?
I didn't even know you wrote one.
No, I didn't, but I was joking, but I literally was thinking about it this morning.
At least wait till after the draft.
Yeah, it is. It's pointless. But speaking of the draft, that's coming up, and Luke, you wrote an article about something that is at the front of my mind. That's probably one of the most pertinent things in regards to the draft, considering Rick Spielman's track record. But you touched on the draft day trades. Sorry. And whether they're a good or a bad thing, and so I wanted you to kind of explain how you attempted to, quantify that and what your results were.
So draft position in the NFL behaves super, in an interesting way, in that it's a logarithmic function, and those are a lot of fancy words, but it basically means it is a steep drop off at the beginning and then it flattens out near the end. So the difference between pick 1 and pick 10 is huge. The difference between pick 201 and 210 is almost nothing. So if you take that kind of shape of how things are valued, and I go into the article and who's done that math and how they're actually valuing these picks, there's ways that you can kind of manipulate that to your advantage. And the first one is in the late rounds, you want to just hoard as many as you can, and the actual position of them doesn't really matter a lot. Like the difference between a mid-7th round pick and a mid-5th round pick is super, super small historically. Like the hit rate of, hey, we got a good player in the 7th versus we got a good player in the 5th is like almost the same. So just get a bunch of them. And similarly,
I was going to ask real quick, is that true as well for the way that they allocate points in regards to like trading picks? So, you know, when a team tries to move from 10 to 1, obviously they have to provide a lot of value, and there's a lot of points associated with those picks, saying, you know,
it's those trade charts. Yeah.
Yeah, is that the same thing? Are those
that's
points?
what I'm working off of.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah. But not the Jimmy Johnson one that you probably see everywhere, where it's like 3,240. These are much more rooted in like actual historical data. The Jimmy Johnson numbers were like drawn on the back of a napkin. They're like totally arbitrary. But yeah, so that's kind of why, like, when you see Rick Spielman trade down and get like 4 7th rounders and everyone makes fun of it, he's just trying to go for quantity over quality, because after about the middle of the 5th round, like, everybody's kind of the same. And then when you trade up, you have to think about it in the context of the player, not the pick. So, like, for example, the Dalvin Cook trade. We traded from pick 48 to pick 41, and we paid more than that jump is worth. We overpaid to do that. But we got what most people would agree is like maybe the 15th, 16th best player on everybody's big board at that time. Like a player, you're right, a player in like a higher range. So, you know, when you look at that, say if you traded from pick 48 to pick 15, you'd give up a ton of value, and we gave up way less than that. And I think that's a much better lens through which to look at like draft trades. And then on the flip side of that, find somebody with a draft crush and then make them overpay to come to your spot because they think they're coming up for, you know, one of the best players. And that's something the Vikings have been really good at, with like getting the Niners to trade up with them for C.J. Beathard, or trading with the Chiefs so that they could go get Kareem Hunt, who we didn't need anymore, but they were going to pay a lot for. Or like Leonte Carew, which was my favorite one from the 2016 draft.
Do you find that creates a dynamic in the league where good teams, or teams that have, on paper, quote-unquote stacked teams, that they can kind of take advantage of crappier teams who have needs to fill?
Totally.
Like a battle between like teams who can focus on like best player available versus guys who need. I mean, it seems like an obvious question, but I wonder if that's been like proven through history. Like teams that have to get a quarterback, so they have to get in the top 5, versus teams that can just sit back and wait. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I brought that up in the article too. The Jets, they paid way too much to go from 3 to 6, or from 6 to 3, but they did it because they need a quarterback. And the Colts can now kind of go back 3 spots, probably still get one of the guys they wanted to get at 3 anyways, because everybody they moved past is like looking at a quarterback. And they picked up a king's ransom. I know that Eric Eager, who I do the pocket protectors with, did an interesting bit on that trade, where he basically like simulated all the possible outcomes, and it's pretty unlikely that the Jets come out on the better end of that trade.
You know, you talk about anybody after the middle of the 5th round, the differences is really slim. It just reminded me of why there was so much frustration 2, maybe 3 years ago, where Spielman was trying to get his 10 picks. You know, it seems like that's a number he likes to set on, and he kept trading down. And so there was like, you know, 2 6-rounders and 3 7-rounders.
That was last year.
Was that last year?
That was last year.
Because we did the live chat, and we kept getting all excited for the pick, and then he kept trading down, and it was like...
What that has to be, you know... Now, granted, maybe you're going for quality, and you're not thinking most of those guys are going to make your team anyway, so you just get enough fish in the barrel that you can shoot one and hit one. But... That just seems to be counterintuitive to what you're saying. If you know, why trade back down into those picks if you've got stuff that has
right.
Yeah, that's a good
so
point
those trades were, I think, a little bit overboard, because specifically, like, once we picked Ben Gedeon, and then we had, if you remember, we had 3 4th rounders, and then we like really moved them all way too far down, or we moved that 4th rounder down like a bunch of times.
Right. Yep.
So that pick ended up being Rodney Adams, but we traded past Desmond King. We traded past one of the linemen that everybody really wanted. I think Isaac Asiata was his name.
Yeah.
So we traded past valuable players, and we actually did move that like far, like really far into a spot where like the value was way lower. What I'm talking about is like when you trade stuff. Like, I believe it was the 2015 draft, they had the first pick in the 5th round, and they traded down and they split it into 2 fifth-round picks. And that's essentially you just doubled your value, and one of those turned out to be Diggs.
Yep.
So that's more what I'm talking about. I think when you're trading in the higher rounds, like to pick up late-round equity, the point is pick up additional picks rather than pick up like, oh, we traded down and we moved a 7th to a 6th. That has almost no value. But we picked up a new 6th that we did not have before, and we now have more quantity of picks. That has value. And obviously, you got to make sure the deal is square.
You're also, at that point, you're hoping that with more picks back there, you're going to run into somebody that wants a certain player, and they're going to be able to deal something for you too. So, but I don't know if I just raced through your article here before we got on the air. Sorry, but did you make the determination as whether or not, maybe this is a stupid question, trading up is better than trading down because of what Rick Spielman likes to do?
Well, historically, trade down, the people who trade down usually get the better end of the deal, and that's been proven pretty solidly over time. And really, no matter how you measure it, the people who trade down, because they're generally getting a higher quantity.
Yeah.
If you trade down and you end up with 3 players are pretty much always going to be better than one, even if that one is the best player that was taken in the whole thing. 3 players is still going to outdo it, like value wise.
Yeah, that's true.
It's basically like,
but
if
you're targeting a guy who's falling, if you're trading up for Dalvin Cook, you might be able to win that trade.
It's obviously the draft is a crapshoot regardless of the round, so it's like having as many darts as possible to throw at the wall. I would be interested to see, and I think I know the answer before I ask this, but when you look at those drafts where teams gave, like you said, the Kings ransom, the Jets gave up, but then you look at like the Redskins gave up basically every pick that they had to move up to get RG3, I believe.
Right.
Or Ditka back in the day getting Ricky Williams and giving up like
trading a whole draft.
Yeah.
Literally a whole draft.
I don't know if that weights things in terms of the history, but obviously I'm just surprised that teams still do that just based on the fact that.
And that's outside of the realm of like philosophically, that's just a dumb decision. Even though the Rams like squandered most of those picks and like whiffed on all of them, that doesn't mean that they weren't valuable assets that just got wasted.
And it reminds me of, just because we're talking about like how the draft is a crapshoot. I was watching a podcast earlier today, and there was a player that played for the Raiders back when Lane Kiffin was the coach, and he was talking about DeFilippo was one of the coaches on that staff, and he gave Jamarcus Russell, probably the biggest bust, #1 overall pick ever, a DVD on a Friday, and said, there's like 20 plays on this DVD. Will you go home over the weekend, watch them, and then come in on Monday and tell us which plays you like and which plays you don't like? And Russell came in on Monday and said, yeah, coach, I loved all the plays. I'll do whatever you want. And DeFilippo gave him a blank DVD just to see if he would watch it, and he didn't. So I was like, man, that's kind of a...
Beware, Vikings, beware, Vikings.
He's sneaky that way. I kind of wish you would have given him like Harry and the Hendersons just to see if he would have noticed it or not, but it's just...
I would love to see someone do it, just talking about this draft. Someone to do a deep dive on the way the Patriots do their drafts. They're constantly they're constantly trading veterans that are coming up soon. They traded Brandon Cooks, didn't he go to the Rams?
To the Rams.
Yeah. And
for a higher pick than they gave up for him last year.
Yeah, and they got a 4th rounder or something, and they got the first rounder for him, and they gave up the 4th rounder. But it's just what they do is amazing, and
they got a first rounder for Cooks.
Pardon me.
They got pick 23 for Cooks.
I didn't know.
So they picked twice in the first now.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Set up.
And they, granted, they have the luxury of doing some of this because they've won, and they've got Brady, who's one of the probably greatest quarterback ever, some people think, and so you have that luxury. You can do these things that they've done, but I would love to just someone take some analysis of that and say what the heck are they doing and why does it make sense and constantly work out for them. So
the answer is analytics and economics. Bill Belichick's been using analytics since he got hired, and no other teams in the league could figure it out.
And as we learned a couple weeks ago, though, at least at the time of that podcast, the Vikings were one of the 2 teams that weren't accepting PFF analytics.
Oh, that's not true.
Isn't it?
I know which 2 teams. I won't say just out of courtesy, but I know which 2 teams it was. It was the Vikings are one of the 30.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I don't know who you're loyal to or if you've been threatened, but I didn't know the analytical community was life or death.
Collusion.
No, just a courtesy, because that's not a secret that should be out.
I suppose. And I wanted to also, I've seen like every mock draft that I look at, and maybe it's my bias in regards to the player that I want and the conference that he comes from, but I know you guys pay a lot more attention to that stuff. Everything, I mean, I know the Vikings met with Billy Price at the Combine, and there was a small blurb in the paper about it, and they said a lot of positive stuff, which obviously they're going to do. But do you guys, I mean, especially with what in the context of what we were just talking about with the trades, how do you feel about the Vikings' first-round pick in general? Do you think that do you have a feeling they might trade into the second round? And in regards to Billy Price, do you think that's the guy that they want, or do you think that they could get him in the second round if they traded down 10 spots?
If you want interior line, which the Vikings definitely want interior offensive line, in this draft, it's loaded with interior line, and you can get good interior line in the second round. So if they did want to trade back, they would still be able to get maybe Billy Price. People might be turned off by the peck. They might just not draft any guards because they don't really value guards that high. But you've still got James Daniels, Frank Ragnow, Isaiah Wynn and Will Hernandez might even be there, even though those guys are bigger first-round names. There's a lot of interior guys, or even tackles that, don't have long enough arms to be tackles, so you have to move them to guard, that fit what the Vikings want in the zone scheme and the agility that they want in offensive linemen. There's a lot of guys to choose from. So even if you waited till pick 62 and you drafted like Maurice Hurst or someone else at pick 30, I think you'd still be able to get a guy that can plug and play and be a starter.
I would say it's a good possibility, Joe. He's only got 7 picks, right? He needs to get 3 more.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
And only 3 in the top 100. So hopefully if you trade back from 30, you're trading back 10 picks, you're getting an extra third out of that or something like that. That is what you want. And it's something above that threshold where everybody starts to be the same.
Right. Yeah, and I know, Luke, you've talked about this in the past, and I saw an article this week, I think from the Daily Norseman, that kind of scared me a little bit because in our conversations about Cousins, you've kind of talked about where he struggles, and interior pressure seems to be something that he struggles with, and I think the headline was Vikings Achilles heel, interior pressure, and I was like, oh, crap. So you got to think that, they're obviously going to load up there with Berger retiring especially. The Price move would just be amazing, I think, just based on the obvious factors of him and the familiarity that he has with Elflein and the fact that he's
Big Ten.
Ohio State, all sorts of records. I think he was runner-up, at least for the best center. I'm not sure if he won that or not. But anyway, where else do you think that the team might go? I know we touched on wide receivers a little bit. The Sherrills thing is big, I believe, just because obviously they don't need to look for a guy who can return punts, which would have been kind of a different variable they had to deal with. But do you think there's some where else do you think they might be looking?
Tight end could be one.
Tight end, absolutely, and maybe I saw some talk recently about, I shouldn't say a talk. It was Mel Kiper or one of the 2 guys, Mel Kiper. What's the guy's name? Todd McShay.
Todd McShay.
Yeah, they're talking about defensive back in case Wayne/McKenzie doesn't pan out the way they want him to. So they might be looking at them in the second round with their second pick, I should say.
Yeah, I think you could end up actually seeing a first-round cornerback, and then second round. There's a real chance that Billy Price is actually there at the back of the second round, just by virtue of the fact that he plays interior offensive line. We thought, Pat Elflein was being mocked in first rounds last year. He fell all the way to the third. Teams just don't draft these guys.
And the injury helps, like you said.
Yeah, it helps, and he'll be back by training camp, so it's not something you should care about, but it's something teams will because they have a month to overthink it.
Yeah.
But with cornerbacks, I know Isaiah Oliver is somebody that's getting a lot of hype right now. He's super technically polished, and he's this like big, long, lanky corner that can really like get his hand in. Even if he isn't in the best position, he can still get his hand on the ball.
That's Zimmer's prototype.
Right, it's like a Zimmer wet dream. And Jair Alexander is another one that a lot of people are high on, and both of these guys are being projected to be there at the end of the first round. So I can actually really see the Vikings doing that and just having like a loaded defensive back class. They do need more corners just because of depth. Right now they don't have anybody behind the starters, and that's not even considering if you want to make this, Waynes and Alexander compete with someone. Like right now they are not competing with anybody. If you want that or you want a good backup, you're going to have to get a corner in the draft.
Where do you see Denzel Ward going? Because I've seen him
top 15.
Okay, because I've seen him drop to the low 20s in some of the ones I was looking at, and that kind of made me.
He dropped in our mock draft.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was crazy. And we were like, wow, how'd he drop this? I don't think he's going to drop that far. But that would be incredible. He'd be a great pick at 30.
Yeah, I've been trying to coordinate a draft party at the movie theater that we hosted the season opener Saints games at, and I was thinking Friday would be fun because the first round pick is obviously the most exciting, but I have a feeling that Saturday is going to be the big day for that. So people should keep that in mind and follow the sites because obviously we're going to promote that if that happens. I did want to talk. We touched on this one on the first show that we attempted to record, but we do have some new writers working on purplePTSD.com, especially Roger Dyer is one of them. Joe, you kind of explained it, so I don't want to steal your thunder. If you want to talk about the article that he wrote too, so people can check that out.
Yeah, Roger comes from. He spent some time working for the Mankato Free Press in Mankato. There's a connection. He's from my vintage. There's another connection. But what he's doing right now for the site is writing a series of first games by the quarterback for the Vikings. And the first one he started off with was Fran Tarkenton's game. And I had told him after I read it, it was just so wonderful to read about it because I'd always seen, other things I've done. I've always seen this game, where the Vikings, their first game as a professional team, first regular season game was against the defending champion Chicago Bears, and they kicked them like 30-something-7. And Fran Tarkenton came off the bench for George Shaw and never went back. And he basically, what's the guy? Wally pipped him, and he ran for a touchdown. I think he threw for 4 more. And, it was running all over the field. And he talked to some people. One guy was an offensive lineman that was on the team, and he was describing what it was like blocking for Tarkenton, because they were just, what's this guy doing? And they were driving the offensive lineman crazy to try to create a pocket, and he's running around all over. But then after they saw what he could do, they really warmed up to him. So it was a really good story, and it was fun for me because I've always wanted to learn more about this game, and I think it should be interesting as it goes forward and talks about some other first games for Vikings quarterbacks throughout history. It's great for the dead zone that we're in right now until the draft.
And it's great for guys like me and Luke too, because I don't have, we obviously don't have those memories, and I've heard about that first Bears game, but I don't know a lot about those teams outside of the fact they went to the Super Bowl and everything. So yeah, I love hearing about Tarkenton, and I always wonder, I've heard that he had a lot of it was hard for the coaches to coach him because he wasn't a prototypical quarterback, especially in that era.
Oh, Van Bracklin hated his guts.
Yeah, that's something that is just really fun to
it's fast, and there's some great stuff about Van Bracklin in this piece that he wrote. I mean, just guy, this lineman, I can't think of his name, I can't even pronounce it, but he's from Minnesota, and he came back to Minnesota to play for his home team after he was with the Giants, I believe, and he told them he wanted to come back and finish his career here. And after one season with Van Bracklin, he wanted out, because he was such an ass. So it's a very great piece, great, well worth reading if you pass across it.
Definitely. And what were there any pieces that you guys were working on that you wanted to talk about or promote?
I'm going to wait and see what, Joel, you come up with, and I'm going to write the anti-piece to that. So.
Yeah, I think you would get a huge following that way, based on some of the recent feedback that I've gotten from everybody.
Yes.
No, I love it, man. I mean, I like being the oddball, and I do feel like some of my takes are strange, but they do pan out in a way. I will be honest. I mean, going back to Teddy, if people want to give me a lot of credit for the Cousins thing as one of the most vocal people, my conclusion after that whole Cousins debate was, I want him, but I know it's going to be Teddy. I wasn't necessarily saying we were going to get him. I mean, I think my conclusion was good things don't happen to the Vikings. But
Luke,
you know,
you'll
it's fun.
You'll do that deep dive on the Patriots, Luke. That should be next.
I'm probably going to do something. I'm still doing a lot with that, like all of that career approximate value stuff. And I did a little with it last year about this time, so I might do something else with it, geared toward like, okay, how good actually is Rick Spielman at drafting? Because I did like a league-wide kind of career AV. Okay, who's gotten the most career AV from their drafts? And that's an interesting way to do it. But I also wanted to compare it to like draft positions. So like, how good are we at how often do we do Stephon Diggs's and how often do we do David Yankees? And how good is that compared to the rest of the league? Because I think the standards on that are kind of heavily skewed. You know, I had a conversation with somebody today on Twitter about Rick Spielman being bad in the late rounds. And it's like everybody's bad in the late rounds. There are no players in the late rounds. Like there's only like one or two players that comes out of there every year that's like actually good.
And I wonder what Zimmer's influence is, because he obviously is batting like 100 or 1,000 when it comes to defensive players, but not to keep
even his first year they drafted Scott Crichton in the third round.
It seems like that he struggles with quarterbacks and wide receivers a little bit.
That'd be nice to see that piece, Luke, because when it comes to Spielman, people either love him or hate him. It's almost.
I don't know how you can hate him.
I know a guy that I really respect, and he hates Spielman. And I learned that the KQ Morning Show also hates Spielman. And I don't know how you can look at this team and dislike Spielman.
How can you look at other GMs in the league and like rather have those guys? These guys that are like the quotes coming out about like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson right now are just asinine. Stuff about Baker Mayfield wearing a headband, like all this stuff coming out of teams. We're just sitting there quietly going about our business. We're going to draft more good players than bad again, and it's going to be great.
Didn't you do a piece, kind of not this exactly, but something similar about Spielman and his drafting last year? Did you?
I did. So last year I did. I essentially just added up everybody's career AV versus what they were expected to get, and then I just looked at GMs like through that lens, and Spielman ranked like 5th in the league behind only John Schneider, who's been ridiculous, and Ryan Grigson, who drafted Andrew Luck, and literally his entire resume was Andrew Luck. Well, and a couple other guys that were like that. Scott McLaughlin, who got fired like a week after I wrote that article.
He's the alcoholic, right? Yeah.
Yeah, except I think that was a weird Redskins thing, because he's been fine. Where I forget where he ended up. I think it was Kansas City, but he's been like great there. I don't know.
Well, I look forward to it. That sounds like a good deal. I like Spielman. I think he does a good job. I think he gets a bad rap. I think he makes mistakes. Obviously, they all do, but it's a crapshoot, and I think he does. He hits more than he misses it.
It's a
measurably fewer mistakes than everybody else makes.
And that's the way you should. That is the perfect way to talk about it, because it is such a crapshoot that you can't look at it any other way than that. And considering the fact that I can say with confidence that I'm more confident in this Vikings team's ability to actually go to the Super Bowl than I think I've ever been outside of maybe 2009 and 98 when I was younger. I'm all for it. I kind of have to be. I've been told.
We need a scale on Joe's confidence level in the Vikings. I'd love to see that.
Well, the article I've written most of it, but I keep changing is, as a Cousins guy, now that we have Cousins, like, now what? What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to look forward to?
It's on you, brother. He's your guy.
I'll take it. I'll take the lumps, even though I'm still waiting for the respect for the Mike Wallace thing that I keep name dropping.
I'll give you a high five downtown Minneapolis if they were walking the streets and sliding up and down grease poles.
I was gonna say we're gonna buy the grease poles with the Crisco on them, rub some bread on there. But that's been the show. Check us out on social media, Facebook and Twitter at purplePTSD and at Vikings Territory. We will be back most likely in 2 weeks unless something huge happens. next week, and then we'll be pretty close to the draft, so that'll be a big focus. But definitely keep an eye out for whether or not we're going to actually have that draft day party. The plan would be to have people come a little bit early, do a Q&A with a few of the writers from both sites on stage, and have food and some delicious liquor for everybody this time. So keep an eye out for that.
Did this record, Joe? Did this record?
I didn't know how to tell you guys, but no, my computer's not even on right now.
Oh my god!
I'm just very lonely. But yeah, thanks for listening, and check us out in a couple weeks. Skull. It's like